Welcome to class. Today we are going to talk about standard languages and the process of standardization. It's a very important topic in social linguistics and lots of research and scholarly discussions have undergone to develop a consensus on the stages and processes of standardization. When we say the process of standardization, the phrase itself implicitly expresses a deliberate attempt in doing so. Why do we need to standardize a language? Language is a social phenomenon and language is owned by people. Then who does this uh, in quotes standardization process, right? Because even without standardization in quotes, language functions perfectly fine and it has been used by community for various purposes. It has extended social functions. So what is the need for standardization? Why do we standardize a language? So if you have any extended institutional function and for in most of the cases this standardization process happens with when you want to declare a particular language as an official language or a national language, or if you extend its function, label it differently, then we need to standardize it and we do it. This process of standardization is always contentious, debatable, and the supporters and opposition both have been engaged in debates for years and years. But today we'll briefly look at the process of standardization and how and why we do it. If we go by the idea of Vado, I quote, the process by which a language has been codified in some way. That's the process of standardization, standard language. That process usually involves the development of such languages uh, in terms of grammar, spelling, books, dictionaries, and possibly a literature. So, deliberate attempts are made to make a particular variety, a particular code standard. Uh, Holmes 2013 says standard variety is generally one which is written and which has undergone some degree of regulation or of regularization of codification. For example, in terms of grammar and dictionary, it is recognized as prestigious variety of the code by a community. So, in some way, it is a deliberate attempt, and a language is chosen and codified. So, it gets an institutional support, it gets extended institutional functions, and suddenly the status of language changes. Holmes underlines the fact that standard language will have a written literature, a written format. But if you look at the languages of the world, majority of them do not have writing system. But because language is primarily oral, and not all languages have a script. Even if a language has a writing system, majority of them do not have scripts. So such activities of making them standard, assigning a script, and writing in a language are all volitional deliberate attempt in order to assign a high status and uh, you know institutional support. We do standardization of a language and the speakers of the language attain a kind of status and elitism. So it's an elite initiative by institutions to give it a prestige value to give a particular code a prestige value. Now, Wado lists 4 advantages of standardization, and it says, his recommendation says, it allows the language to serve as a model for everyone in community to degree upon in order to communicate. So it's almost like prescriptive in nature. It's not natural; it's prescriptive. So a particular code is being prescribed after codification, and of course it brings uniformity in the use, and it becomes a model for others in the community, and they use it. Second, he says it is common and mutually comprehensible language that unifies the members of a community. So it develops solidarity among the community members, as he says. It can be employed to reflect and symbolize some kind of identity, and can also be used to give prestige to speakers. And fourth, he says, it makes the language is easier to teach in schools. So extended function. So this advantage, the advantages of it is that it develops solidarity among the speakers of the language. It makes the use of language uniform. It produces a lot of referential materials and literature and the grammar, thesaurus and other things as the reference document. And it can be formally taught in the school or at any level. So it can be learned by any other foreign, other speaker of the non-native speaker of the language. These are the advantages that Wado lists about standardization of language. Janet Holmes proposes these 4 stages. So look at these 4 stages of language standardization. So the first stage is called selection. The second stage is codification. The third stage is elaboration. And the fourth stage is acceptance. So there are 4 stages involved in the process of standardization of a language. And all of these 4 are interrelated, interdependent. They are not independent processes, and they go in that sequence, right? So the first is selection. So if you look at selection, selection and acceptance are steps which involve social and political factors. Now, which suppose let take a case of India for that matter, which is multilingual in nature, hundreds of languages spoken in this country. There are 4 major language family and the 5th one a minor language family, minor family. So 5 language families of 5 different, groups of languages. Like you have Indo-Aryan language families, you have Dravidian language families, you have Austroasiatic language families, you have Tibeto-Burma language families. So each of these families have hundreds of languages in them as a member. And suppose I have to choose one language for a standardization process. It's such a controversial political and social problem. What is the criteria of choosing a language for standardization? And what about the other languages that we leave behind? Isn't it a discriminatory process? Isn't it institutionally favoring a particular variety, a particular language? Within the same language, which variety are you going to adopt or select for standardization? Right? For that matter, look at Hindustani, case of Hindustani and Hindi. After partition, Urdu was declared as official language of Pakistan, Hindi was declared as official language of India. But look at Hindustani, which is spoken in the streets, in the markets, in the family domain or informal domain among friends, relatives, right? We don't make a distinction, and Hindustani is an amalgamation of this composite culture. Hindi and Urdu, two separate labels assigned, and attempts were made to make them look, sound, and feel different. Right? Apart from a few phonological factors, phonological characters, and one or two syntactic, morphosyntactic rules like genitive phrases, the grammar is the same, right? So at all levels, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics, they both look same, but they have two different levels. So the process of standardization began after being adopted as official languages. Commissions and committees were set up in Pakistan for Urdu, in India for Hindi, and we have got a lot of a continued effort being carried out to develop, promote, and make Hindi acceptable all over the country. But again, regional languages are also given, some of them, not all of them, have been given constitutional statutory status, where Schedule 8 of the Constitution lists 22 languages as scheduled languages. But if you look at the census 2011, we have the government identifies 121 languages as full-fledged languages spoken and used in the country. Out of 121, 22 are listed and called scheduled languages in the 8th schedule of the Constitution, and 99 languages are called non-scheduled languages. If you go by, the entries and returns of the respondents to enumerators, what you find? More than 15,000 varieties being returned in 2011 census as mother tongue. So that's the complexity and diversity of this country, right? So selecting a particular code or a particular variety or particular language and then making it a standard is an uphill task. But of course, the first stage of standardization involves selection of a particular code for this purpose of standardization. So, out of the 4 stages, 2 stages are socio-politically sensitive, and they have a lot of socio-political factors implied in such selection, and also responses of the people towards this selection. So, 2 stages, selection and acceptance, are socio-political in nature. But the remaining 2, codification and elaboration, these 2 stages are pure linguistic exercises where efforts are made to create resources. When we say codification, that means we are codifying the rules, developing the reference material for the grammar, setting up grammar rules, developing dictionaries, right, thesaurus, reference documents. And elaboration means you are extending the scope and the function of language to different extended domains, be it intellectual, literary, science, technology, education, administration. So, language has to be developed to such an extent that it fulfills all these functions in all these extended domains. So, out of the 4 interrelated stages of standardization, 2 stages, selection and acceptance, are socio-political in nature, and codification and elaboration are pure linguistic in nature. So, let us go to each of these stages one by one. So, we will start with selection. So, a standardization represents an attempt to curtail, minimize, if not eliminate, the high degree of variability, Sadler 1983 said. So, what do? We try to minimize the variation. That means we try to make the grammar, use, and function of the variety or the code chosen for the purpose little or with no variability. So, we try to fix it, make it uniform so that we minimize the variation. So, the variation in the language is minimized and it become minimal, right? A variety of code is selected for this purpose, and the chosen dialect may be the one spoken by powerful and elite educated groups and has wider acceptance and spread. But in some cases, look at, for example, cases in African countries, in order to protect their indigenous languages, governments in African countries have adopted selected, codified, elaborated, and you know uh, have made efforts to make it accepted by the population as standard variety in order to preserve their culture, their inherited knowledge, and their heritage. So it is also an attempt to preserve a language where we see the declaration of some indigenous languages as official languages in certain African countries. So, a chosen dialect is usually widely popular, acceptable, and used by a large population, and you know it enjoys primacy over rest of the languages. So that's the variety chosen for this purpose. Sometimes it may be for preservation, like some African countries are doing. Sometimes it is for declaring them as official languages, like Pashto and Dari in Afghanistan, Urdu in Pakistan, Hindi in India, and regional languages like Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, Kannada, Punjabi, Marathi, Bangla at regional levels. Bangla in Bangladesh. You can understand the case of Bangla that led to division of erstwhile East and West Pakistan. Now Bangladesh in 1971 carved out. So the language was such a bone of contention between these uh, two systems, and Bangladesh had fought a war for their independence in 1971. So these languages have been chosen and have undergone a huge amount of codification. So selection is the first stage. Once you select, then we go to the next stage. And what is that next stage? Codification. And what do you mean by that? So the codification refers to standardizing its structural or linguistic features. And what are these features? In terms of grammar, extended vocabulary, right? An elaborate linguistic exercise, the norms and rules of grammar, use, etc., are formulated and laid down. Uh, New dictionaries are created, thesaurus are created, you know, uh, manuals are created, spellers are created, style sheets and texts, and we work on the scripts. So, lots of linguistic exercises we do to codify it, right? So, this is pure linguistic exercise carried out by groups of experts, committees, commissions, and language bureaus created by the institutions and governments, right? And they create manuals, and they're codified in such a way that all the official activities can be carried out. huge body of literature is created, textbooks are created, curriculum are created, so that it can be taught in the school and learnt by non-native speakers. So this is the second stage where a lot of linguistic exercises are carried out and the language is enriched in terms of extended descriptions of grammar, creating grammar books, formulating rules, creating dictionaries, creating thesaurus, creating user manual, creating spellers and the styles and the texts, right? So, a lot of resources are generated to support this initiative of making it standard. So, resource materials are created. That's the second stage. In the third stage is called elaboration. And elaboration refers to extending its function for use in new domains. So, elaboration refers to extending the functions of language in new domains, right? And in order to make it effective in discharging a whole range of functions in governance, in administration, as well as abstract intellectual functions, right? Continued exercises are carried out over a period of time to enrich and extend the functions of this chosen variety. So this variety is, or this code is made equipped with all referential materials, document supports, you know, extended vocabulary list, right? Reformulated and extended grammatical functions. India has a dedicated statutory and an administrative wing to develop, promote, and elaborate Hindi. For example, Kendriya Hindi Sansthan is apex body in looking after the growth of Hindi, its spread and acceptability pan India. Then all the the parliament has Raj Bhasha Vibhag, and all central government departments have a Hindi officer whose job is to look at the implementation of constitutional provisions, general orders, and rules being made or which have been made to promote Hindi in all government functions and functionings. Right. 17th September, for that matter, it's celebrated as Hindi Divas, Hindi Day. So, a lot of exercises are carried out for acceptability. That is the fourth stage. So, after elaboration, we work for acceptance of this variety or the standard code among the population, among the people. So, the status of new variety is important, and people's attitude to have this variety uh, being developed must be considered. Because all this exercise becomes futile if people do not accept it. So, that is why we said that selection and acceptance are socio-political in nature. So, then the standardizing body, or the body which is primarily responsible for making it standard variety, takes a lot of measures and campaigns to make it acceptable. And it is not achieved within a short period of time. It takes time. It's a time taking process, and gradually people start accepting this variety as standard variety. A kind of prestige, a perceived prestige is achieved, assigned to it, and accepted by the people. This variety also offers social upward mobility opportunities for employment and for growth. So, steps may be needed to enhance its prestige, for instance, and to encourage people to develop pride in the language. And you can see these are all prescriptive in nature, but it takes time and gradually it evolves. This is also known as status planning or prestige planning. We'll talk about language planning in some other class, not here today. And this is done through the institution, agencies, authorities such as schools, ministries, and the media and cultural establishments. So it's a whole gamut of effort and a huge range of agencies. Some agencies are, created by the government, then the media, then the establishment, then the cultural agents, and other opinion makers extend support in promoting this variety and also helping perceive an added prestige to this variety, and gradually it is accepted by people as standard variety. So, summing up, process of standardization is a deliberate attempt done by institutions for achieving a particular purpose, maybe for preservation of culture and heritage, like some African countries do so, where they have announced a particular variety, indigenous variety, as their official language. They have standardized that and adopted as official language. However, majority of the works are carried out in colonial history, English, but still they have given official status to such indigenous languages. They have been adopted, they have been codified, they have been elaborated and now accepted by majority of population. Functions could not be extended in those cases, but here in India, we have declared Hindi as official language, and at regional level, various languages like Tamil, Telugu, Odia, Bangla, Punjabi, Marathi, Malayalam, Kannada. So, these are the languages which are adopted, codified, elaborated and accepted as standard variety. This is done by institutional, and standard language has institutional support. And any variety qualifies, any code qualifies to be standardized by the institution, but the selection of it is socio-political. So, there are socio-political factors why we select a particular language for the standardization process. And once we select, then two other stages are involved, which are purely linguistic in nature. One is called codification, the other is called elaboration, right? So, in codification, rules are fixed, right? They are extended, functions are extended, right? Uh, Grammar books are created, thesaurus are made, reference materials are created, manuals, user manuals, spellers, style sheet. These are all mentioned and developed. In elaboration, the functions of the language is elaborated because the functions of language is extended. It can now go up to abstract functions, literary functions, other government official functions, science, technology, education. So, depending on the need, code is elaborated and lots of reference materials, thesaurus are created. And then the fourth stage, which is called acceptance, is again persuasive in nature. Deliberate attempts are made by the government or the agencies to promote, support and make it accepted, by the larger part of population. So, this is the process of standardization. We will continue our discussion about, case of India and linguistic diversity of India, and how this process of standardization or adopting some of the languages as a regional level as official language. We will talk about all of these later. Thank you for now. Thank you very much.